Your soulmate asked the psychic about your money. The truth they discovered was shocking. My beloved child, something about that conversation changed the moment your name was mentioned. Your soulmate had gone to the psychic expecting a simple answer about your money, your stability, and the kind of future you might be building. But instead of answering immediately, the psychic became strangely thoughtful. Not worried. Not confused. Almost impressed. And what came next made your soulmate realize they had been looking at your situation completely wrong. Because the question sounded ordinary, what does their financial future look like? Yet the answer was anything but ordinary. The psychic looked at your soulmate and said, "You're asking about what they have now. You should be asking about what they're becoming. Stay a little longer, because that single sentence was only the beginning." Your soulmate had noticed things about you that never completely made sense. You didn't always reveal your plans. You didn't announce every goal. Sometimes you seemed quiet when everyone else was trying to prove themselves. And because of that silence, people may have underestimated what was happening behind the scenes. But the psychic described your path differently. She spoke about patience. Timing. A decision you would eventually make that could completely change the direction of your financial life. And then she said something your soulmate wasn't prepared to hear. You cannot measure this person by their current chapter. Think about that. What if the version of your life people can see right now is only the smallest part of the story? Your soulmate leaned forward. Suddenly, this wasn't simply about money anymore. It was about your mindset. Your potential. The way you recover from setbacks, notice opportunities, and quietly learn from experiences other people forget. But there was another detail. One that made the psychic pause again. She told your soulmate that your greatest advantage would not come from luck appearing out of nowhere. It would come from something you develop within yourself, the ability to recognize the right opportunity before others understand its value. And that changed everything. Because your soulmate had been wondering whether your future would feel uncertain or secure. Instead, they were being told that your financial story could become stronger precisely because you refused to remain the same person forever. Don't rush past this moment. The most surprising revelation had not been spoken yet. The psychic continued, there will be a point when people who underestimated them will suddenly wonder when everything changed. Your soulmate went silent. Because they remembered the moments when you kept going without recognition. The times when your ideas may not have been understood. The moments when you chose patience instead of trying to impress everyone around you. Now those moments looked different. They looked like preparation. But then your soulmate asked the question that shifted the entire conversation. Does this mean they're going to become wealthy? The psychic didn't answer yes. She didn't answer no. Instead, she smiled and said, that depends on whether they recognize what is approaching them. And suddenly there was a new mystery. Something approaching you? An opportunity? A choice? A completely different direction? Wait till you hear what she explained next, because this is where your soulmate realized the shocking truth wasn't simply about how much money you could have. It was about why your financial path seemed connected to a major turning point that hadn't happened yet. And according to the psychic, there was one clue your soulmate had already noticed about you without understanding what it meant. One small behavior. One repeated pattern. Something you probably don't even consider unusual. Yet she claimed it revealed more about your future than any number ever could. Your soulmate immediately knew what she was talking about. And once they connected the pieces, they could no longer look at you the same way. Because the person they thought they understood might only be the beginning of who you are becoming. Here is where the conversation took a turn your soulmate never expected. The psychic wasn't interested in predicting a number. She was watching a pattern. Something about the way you think, the way you respond when plans change, and especially the way you refuse to let one difficult chapter define the rest of your story. Then she leaned forward and said, "The clue is that they keep rebuilding quietly." Your soulmate immediately understood. There have been moments when you could have explained everything you were planning. You could have announced your next move, defended your choices, or tried to convince people that you knew where you were going. But instead, you often chose silence. You learned. You adjusted. You kept certain ambitions private until they were ready. And according to the psychic, that habit mattered far more than your soulmate realized. Stay with this, because the next detail surprised them even more. She explained that your financial path didn't appear like one sudden magical moment where everything instantly becomes perfect. It looked more like a sequence of intelligent choices. One opportunity creates another. One skill opens another door. One connection introduces a possibility you couldn't have predicted from where you stand today. Your soulmate asked, "So the turning point isn't here yet?" The psychic paused. "Part of it already is." That answer changed the atmosphere. Because what if your next chapter doesn't begin when money arrives? What if it begins when your thinking changes? Your soulmate started remembering conversations with you. Little comments you had made about wanting something better. Ideas you mentioned casually. Moments when you seemed unusually focused. Things they once considered random suddenly appeared connected. But there was still something missing. The psychic told them that your biggest financial advantage would come when you stop measuring your progress against someone else's timeline. She described you as someone whose strongest results could arrive differently than expected, not because you are behind, but because your path requires you to build something that can actually last. And then came the sentence your soulmate couldn't forget. They may eventually have more choices than they currently imagine. Not simply more money. More choices. That distinction mattered. Because real abundance, she explained, isn't only about a number. It can mean having enough stability to choose where your time goes. Choosing which opportunities deserve your attention. Choosing what you no longer need to tolerate. Choosing to help people you care about without losing yourself in the process. Your soulmate suddenly realized why the psychic had refused to give them a simple prediction. The shocking truth wasn't that some guaranteed fortune was waiting for you. It was that your future could become dramatically different if you recognize your own ability to create, learn, adapt, and make wiser decisions. And strangely, that possibility affected your soulmate emotionally. Because they began asking themselves another question. If their life changes that much, will I still have a place in it? Now the conversation wasn't about money at all. It was about you. about whether your soulmate was prepared to grow beside the person you are becoming. If this story is speaking to you, you can share it with someone who needs this reminder. Leave your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe so you can stay connected to what unfolds next. Because the psychic still had one revelation left for your soulmate. She told them, if you truly care about this person, don't become fascinated by what they might someday have. Pay attention to who they are while they're building it. Your soulmate became completely still. That sentence exposed the question beneath every other question they had asked. Were they curious about your money? Or were they genuinely interested in your journey? Before you go, hear this line. The psychic then asked your soulmate one final question, a question so unexpected that they couldn't answer immediately. If everything they're working toward eventually succeeds, what will you bring into their life that money never could? And your soulmate's answer to that question is where the real truth begins. But your soulmate didn't answer immediately. For the first time since the conversation began, they stopped thinking about what your future might provide and started thinking about what they could contribute to it. The psychic noticed the silence and said something even more unexpected. Their greatest transformation won't be visible in their bank account first. You'll see it in their standards. That landed differently. Because standards change everything. As you become clearer about what deserves your energy, you may become more selective with opportunities, more intentional with your time, and less interested in proving yourself to people who only understand visible success. Your soulmate suddenly realized that the future version of you might not simply have more. You might require less approval. And that was the revelation hidden beneath the entire reading. You'll understand everything at the end, because the next piece connects every clue. The psychic explained that your turning point could begin with something surprisingly ordinary, a skill you decide to take seriously, an idea you stop postponing, a better financial habit, a new direction, or an opportunity you almost overlook because it doesn't initially appear important enough. No guaranteed miracle. No mysterious shortcut. Just one decision that creates momentum. Then another. And another. Until one day, someone looks at your life and assumes everything changed overnight. But you will know differently. You'll remember the quiet beginning. Your soulmate asked, "How will I know when that chapter has started?" The psychic answered, "When they become more protective of their time." That surprised them. Not when you suddenly receive something enormous. Not when everyone starts noticing you. When your time becomes valuable to you. Because once you understand that every hour carries potential, your choices begin changing. You stop chasing every distraction. You become more careful about what receives your attention. And gradually, the future that once felt distant begins looking possible. Stay a little longer. There was one final connection your soulmate needed to understand. They had entered that room asking whether you would have money. But now they realized they had asked the smallest possible question. The better question was whether you were becoming capable of building a life with freedom, stability, purpose, and options. And the psychic believed you had that potential. Potential, not certainty. Because your choices still matter. Your discipline matters. Your willingness to learn matters. The opportunities you accept and reject matter. That is what made the truth more powerful than a simple prediction. Your future wasn't being described as something handed to you. It was being described as something you could participate in creating. Then your soulmate finally answered the question they had been unable to answer earlier. What could I bring into their life that money never could? They thought for a moment. Then quietly said, peace, loyalty, encouragement. Someone who believes in them before everyone else sees what they're building. The psychic smiled. And suddenly your soulmate understood why this entire conversation had happened. They weren't supposed to leave impressed by your possible future. They were supposed to leave examining their intentions toward you. Would they celebrate you before the results appeared? Would they respect your ambition without trying to control it? Would they remain interested in your character even if your circumstances changed? Because the shocking truth about your money was never simply that you might someday have more. It was that the journey toward greater stability could reveal something far more important. Who genuinely values you before there is anything impressive to point at. And perhaps that is the real turning point approaching you. Not merely discovering what you can build, but discovering who deserves to stand beside you while you build it. What happened after that should have ended the conversation, but instead, it opened an entirely new door. Your soulmate thought they finally understood the message. They thought the lesson was simply to value you before your circumstances changed. But the psychic looked at them carefully and said, there is still one thing you haven't asked. Your soulmate hesitated. What? She answered, you asked about their money. You asked about their future. But you never asked what they might do differently once they finally realize their own value. That question stayed in the room. Because there is a difference between gaining something and becoming someone capable of handling it wisely. The psychic explained that your next level would require more than ambition. It would require discernment. Not every opportunity would deserve a yes. Not every impressive promise would deserve your trust. Not every person who suddenly became interested in your progress would deserve access to your plans. And your soulmate immediately understood why this mattered. If your circumstances improve, attention can change. People can notice what they previously ignored. Possibilities can multiply. But your greatest advantage would be knowing what actually belongs in your future, and what doesn't. Wait until this next part, because the psychic connected that idea directly back to your soulmate. She told them, if you want to understand their future, watch what happens when they stop explaining themselves. Your soulmate looked confused. The psychic continued. There may come a stage when you no longer feel the need to convince everyone that your ideas make sense. You simply begin doing the work. Quietly. Consistently. You become less distracted by outside opinions because your attention is moving toward results. That is when people may think you suddenly changed. But you didn't suddenly change. You simply stopped giving every voice equal influence over your direction. And this is where your soulmate felt something unexpected, admiration. They remembered the times you continued even when encouragement was limited. The moments when you had to motivate yourself. The plans you kept alive without knowing exactly how everything would unfold. Those memories suddenly looked like evidence of something larger. Not evidence of guaranteed wealth. Evidence of resilience. And resilience can become incredibly valuable when it is paired with knowledge, patience, and better decisions. If this message has made you think differently about your own journey, share it with someone who is quietly building their next chapter. Tell me in the comments what you believe matters more, money or freedom, and subscribe if you want to stay connected to stories that look beneath the surface. Because your soulmate still needed one final answer. They asked the psychic, "What should I do if their life really begins changing?" Her response came instantly. "Don't compete with their growth. Grow with them." That sentence changed everything. Your soulmate realized that supporting you wouldn't mean watching from the sidelines while you transformed. It would mean becoming more intentional themselves. More mature with their own goals. More thoughtful about the future. More capable of bringing stability into the connection instead of expecting you to create it alone. And then the psychic revealed something your soulmate never expected to hear. She said the strongest future wasn't one where one person became successful while the other simply benefited. The strongest future was one where both people became stronger. Two people learning. Two people building. Two people respecting each other's independence while creating something meaningful together. Suddenly, the original question about your money seemed almost too small. Because your soulmate walked in wanting to know what you might someday possess. They were leaving with a completely different question. Who do I need to become if I want to belong in the future they're building? And before the conversation ended, the psychic gave them one final clue about you. A clue connected to something you may already be doing right now. Something so ordinary that almost nobody around you would recognize its importance yet. But according to her, when that small habit finally meets the right opportunity, your entire direction could begin to shift. Then came the detail your soulmate almost missed completely. The psychic wasn't talking about a hidden fortune, a mysterious windfall, or some effortless shortcut. She was talking about something far less obvious, and potentially far more powerful. She said, the habit is simple. They keep collecting knowledge even when there is no immediate reward for it. Your soulmate's expression changed. Because suddenly, they could see it. The questions you ask. The things you quietly research. The mistakes you remember instead of repeating. The way one experience seems to teach you something that becomes useful much later. Even when nobody notices, you are gathering pieces. And one day, those pieces can connect. That was the clue. But don't move past this too quickly, because the psychic made an important distinction. Knowledge alone doesn't create a different future. Action does. The surprising part was that she believed your biggest shift could happen when something you already know finally meets a reason strong enough for you to act. Imagine that. You could spend months believing nothing important is changing, while underneath the surface your judgment is improving. Your confidence is becoming quieter but stronger. Your understanding of what works, and what doesn't, is becoming sharper. Then one opportunity arrives. Not necessarily enormous. Maybe it even looks ordinary. But this time, you recognize something in it that an earlier version of you would have missed. Your soulmate asked, will they know immediately? The psychic shook her head. No. That's why they'll need courage. And suddenly the reading became more personal than ever. Because the future she described wasn't waiting behind a perfect moment. It depended on your willingness to move when certainty wasn't complete. To examine an opportunity carefully, make a thoughtful decision, and trust the skills you've spent so long developing. Your soulmate finally understood why your financial path had looked so difficult to summarize. It wasn't one straight line. It was a staircase. Some steps would look small. Some would require patience. Some might even feel like you were standing still. But each one could place you in a position to see something you couldn't see before. And then the psychic said, "There is another reason their future surprised me." Your soulmate leaned closer. She explained that your strongest motivation might eventually stop being money itself. At first, you may want financial progress because you want comfort, security, or proof that your effort meant something. But as you mature, the reason can change. You may begin wanting control over your time. The ability to support meaningful goals. The freedom to make decisions without constantly asking whether you can afford to choose differently. That shift, from chasing a number to building options, could become one of the And suddenly, the entire reading came down to one decision. Your soulmate wanted the psychic to explain those two directions immediately, but she refused to make the choice sound simple. She said, "One path may offer quick recognition. The other may offer something slower, quieter, and far more valuable, ownership of their direction." That distinction stayed with your soulmate. Because sometimes the brightest opportunity isn't automatically the best opportunity. Something can look impressive from the outside and still pull you away from what you genuinely want. Another option can appear smaller at first yet teach you the skills, patience, relationships, or experience that eventually create much greater possibilities. The psychic believed your challenge would be recognizing the difference. Not through prediction. Through awareness. You might miss the turning point if you judge everything only by its immediate reward. Your soulmate asked, "So what should they look for?" The answer surprised them. Look for what expands them. An opportunity that teaches you something useful. A decision that increases your independence. A direction that strengthens your judgment. A project that allows your abilities to become more valuable over time. The psychic explained that your financial future could depend less on chasing the biggest number in front of you and more on understanding which decisions create better options later. Then your soulmate remembered something. You had already done this before. Maybe not with money specifically, but with life. There were moments when you walked away from what didn't fit anymore. Moments when you learned something difficult instead of choosing what felt easiest. Moments when you started again because remaining comfortable would have meant remaining unchanged. Suddenly, your past looked like training for your future. And here is where the psychic revealed the part your soulmate would remember long after leaving that room. She said, when their life begins moving forward, they must never confuse attention with loyalty. Your soulmate became quiet. Because growth can change the way people respond to you. Someone who ignored your early effort might become fascinated by your later results. Someone who questioned your direction might suddenly claim they always believed in you. But the psychic's message wasn't about becoming suspicious of everyone. It was about remembering. Remember who encouraged you when nothing was guaranteed. Remember who respected your goals without needing to benefit from them. Remember who cared about your peace as much as your progress. And most importantly, remember who you were before outside recognition arrived. Because money can change circumstances. It should never be allowed to erase character. Your soulmate finally understood why this reading had affected them so deeply. They had originally wondered whether your financial future could make you different. Now they realized the better question was whether they could recognize the real you through every version of your life. Before success. During growth. After transformation. The psychic then gave them an unexpected instruction. If you ever speak to them about their future, don't tell them what I predicted. Ask them what freedom means to them. Why? Because your answer would reveal more than any prediction could. For one person, freedom means time. For another, it means creating something meaningful. For someone else, it means being able to care for family, explore new possibilities, or simply live without constantly feeling pressured by circumstances. Your soulmate left that room thinking about what your answer might be. But just before they reached the door, the psychic stopped them. One more thing. Your soulmate turned around. She smiled slightly and said, "You're still assuming their biggest opportunity will come from somewhere outside them." Silence. Then she delivered the final twist. What if they eventually create the opportunity themselves? That possibility changed the entire meaning of the reading. Because perhaps the door you're waiting to open is a door you haven't built yet. Perhaps the idea that eventually changes your direction begins as something nobody else takes seriously. Perhaps your greatest financial turning point won't start with someone choosing you. It could start when you finally choose yourself. And your soulmate walked away understanding the truth they never expected to discover. Your future isn't interesting because someone can supposedly predict exactly what you'll have. It's interesting because nobody, not even you, has seen the full extent of what you might become once preparation, opportunity, and courage finally meet. Long after your soulmate left that room, one thought refused to disappear. What if the opportunity you create for yourself begins with something you already possess? Not money. Not connections. Not perfect timing. Something quieter, an ability, an idea, a perspective, or a talent you have treated as ordinary simply because it comes naturally to you. That possibility made your soulmate replay the entire conversation differently. The psychic had never described you as someone waiting to be rescued by good fortune. She had described someone gradually becoming more capable of recognizing value, including value within themselves. And that was where the mystery became deeper. Because people often search far away for the thing that could change their direction while overlooking what has been developing beside them for years. A skill they never took seriously. An idea they kept postponing. Knowledge they assumed everyone had. A creative instinct they considered too ordinary. A problem they understand unusually well because they have lived through it themselves. What if one of those things becomes important later? Your soulmate remembered something the psychic had said almost casually. Their breakthrough may begin when they stop asking whether they are ready and start asking what they can improve today. That sentence felt different now. Because waiting for complete confidence can keep someone standing still forever. Growth usually works differently. You begin with what you understand. You improve what you can. You learn from what doesn't work. Then your next decision becomes wiser than your previous one. Stay with this thought, because this is where your soulmate discovered something the original question about money could never have revealed. The psychic believed your relationship with success itself might change. At one stage, success could mean being noticed. Later, it might mean being independent. Then eventually, it could mean something completely different, having enough control over your life that you no longer need to impress anyone. Imagine reaching that point. You don't need every person to understand your direction. You don't need every opportunity. You don't need to chase every comparison. You simply know what matters. And according to the psychic, that clarity could become more valuable than any temporary financial win. But then your soulmate wondered about themselves. If you became more confident, more selective, and more focused, would the connection between you become stronger, or would your paths slowly separate? That question brought them back. They returned to the psychic later with only one thing they needed to understand. Does their growth bring us closer? The psychic's response wasn't what they expected. That depends on whether you love their growth or only the version of them that needs you. Your soulmate went completely quiet. Because genuine connection cannot depend on keeping another person small. If someone truly values you, your progress should not threaten them. Your confidence should not make them uncomfortable. Your independence should not become something they secretly wish to reduce. Instead, two people can become stronger without turning life into a competition. That was the real test hidden inside the money question. Your future circumstances might reveal not only what you are capable of building, but also which relationships can evolve alongside you. And then came another unexpected detail. The psychic told your soulmate there could eventually be a moment when you are offered something that looks almost exactly like the opportunity you have been waiting for. Almost. The money might look right. The timing might look right. Everyone around you might tell you to accept it. Yet something about it may not align with the future you actually want. That is when your growth will be tested. Not by whether you can say yes, but by whether you are confident enough to say no when necessary. Because sometimes the most valuable financial decision is not what you gain. It is what you refuse to trade away. Your time. Your values. Your long-term direction. Your peace of mind. And when your soulmate heard this, they finally understood why the psychic had been so careful from the beginning. She wasn't trying to tell them exactly how much money you would someday have. She was showing them the kind of person you might need to become to handle greater possibilities wisely. But one question remained unanswered. There was still something the psychic had noticed about your future that she had deliberately kept to herself. Something connected not to what you would earn, but to what you might eventually choose to do with what you build. And when your soulmate finally heard that answer, the original question about your money suddenly seemed almost meaningless. Nothing prepared your soulmate for what the psychic revealed next, because the final secret wasn't about how much you could accumulate. It was about what you might eventually decide money is actually for. She looked at your soulmate and said, if they build the life they're capable of building, their greatest satisfaction may come from what that success allows them to change. Your soulmate expected her to explain. She didn't. Instead, she asked, when this person imagines having enough, what do you think they imagine doing next? That question exposed something important. Because there is a difference between wanting money and wanting what money can make possible. Maybe you want breathing room. Maybe you want choices. Maybe you want the ability to support people who once supported you. Maybe you want to create something meaningful without constantly worrying whether it will pay off immediately. Or perhaps you simply want the freedom to wake up knowing your decisions belong to you. Your soulmate began realizing that this was why the psychic had resisted giving them a dramatic number from the beginning. A number would have distracted them from the real story. The real story was transformation. But stay with this, because she wasn't finished. The psychic said there could eventually be a moment when you look around and realize something extraordinary. The things you once thought would make you feel successful may no longer impress you. Recognition might become less important. Comparison might lose its power. Showing people what you have might feel completely unnecessary. Instead, you may become interested in building something that continues creating value even when nobody is applauding. And your soulmate suddenly remembered how quietly you already handle certain things. Perhaps this future version of you isn't as distant as everyone assumes. Then the psychic made an observation that shifted the conversation again. The person they become after progress matters more than the progress itself. Your soulmate asked what she meant. She explained that success amplifies choices. If you become more capable, you also become more responsible for deciding what deserves your attention. Do you use your progress to chase endless approval? Or do you create stability? Do you become obsessed with appearing successful? Or do you invest in learning, meaningful experiences, and opportunities that strengthen your future? Do you forget the people who respected you early? Or do you remember exactly who was there before anything changed? Those questions stayed with your soulmate. Because they had entered the psychic's room wondering whether you would someday have enough. Now they were wondering whether they themselves understood what enough even meant. And that is where the shocking truth became personal for both of you. Your financial journey might not only change your circumstances. It could change your definition of winning. There may come a point when the biggest victory isn't buying something impressive. It is being able to decline something that costs too much of your peace. It isn't proving someone wrong. It is no longer needing their opinion. It isn't becoming the richest person in the room. It is becoming someone who understands the difference between price and value. Wait until this next revelation. Your soulmate asked, if that happens, what will matter most to them? The psychic answered with one word. Legacy. Not necessarily something enormous. Legacy can be knowledge you pass forward. Something useful you create. A family you help become more secure. A person whose life becomes easier because you were generous with your experience. An idea that continues helping people after you have moved on to something new. Suddenly, your soulmate understood why the psychic believed your financial future could become bigger than money itself. Because perhaps your greatest achievement will not be what you manage to keep. Perhaps it will be what you become capable of giving without losing your own stability. And just when your soulmate thought the mystery was finally complete, the psychic added one last sentence. But before any of that can happen, they will face a moment when they must decide whether to remain familiar, or become unfamiliar even to themselves. Your soulmate froze. Because this wasn't another opportunity. It was an identity shift. A moment when your old habits and your future ambitions might pull in different directions. And according to the psychic, what you choose in that moment could influence everything that follows. Your money. Your freedom. Your confidence. Even the relationships that continue into your next chapter. The strangest part? She believed that decision might arrive much sooner than your soulmate expected.